Before we start the video, large thank you to Dr. Penner, Wong, Soup, Wade, Not Kiru, Jackson, Adam, and Sam for their support on Patreon. I hope you guys enjoy the video. Good day, everybody. Okay, jumping right into it, I'm just going to right-click and make a script called World Item Database. And we're doing this so we can get items from this database and load them onto our character when we load a save game. This is because we can't save things like game objects, so we're going to give every item an ID and load the item using its ID from this database. So it will make sense when you see the completion of the end of this video. So I'm going to start by making my namespace SG. I'm going to make this a singleton because it's going to always exist in the scene and there should only be one. So I'm going to say public static world item database. I'm going to call this instance. And then I'm going to make an awake method. And I'm going to say if instance is equal to null, then we're going to say instance is equal to this. And if it's not null, then we know there's two in the scene, and that shouldn't be. So we're going to say destroy game object, as in this game object. So there's only one. Okay, so what's the first thing we do? Well, we're going to basically make it so items have an ID. So the first thing we need to do is go to our item base class, and we need to add a variable. And you can make it a string or an int, or whatever you want, really, as long as you can use it as an identifier. And you just call it item ID. Now, I typically like using an int, and I'll explain why. You can use a string though, perfectly fine. On multiplayer, I like using an int because sending a string over a network using Unity's netcode for game objects is a little odd. You got to specify how big the string is using string 34 or 32 or 64, etc. So I just like using int, but if you're not worrying about that right now, you can use string. Honestly, a string looks nicer in my opinion because you can just call it the name of the item. But for the purpose of this video, I'm going to use int. So let's come back here on the world item database. I'm going to say using system.link. And then I'm going to make a public list. I'm going to call this weapon items. We'll do weapons first. And I'm just going to call this weapon items. And this will be every weapon you have in the game. Now, it's important from this point on. You can initialize this list, by the way. But from this point on, if you don't have this weapon, or you don't have your weapons in this list, and you try to load them after loading a game, they will not be able to load on the characters. So make sure you have every weapon you want to be able to use in your game on this list with its own unique ID. Then I'm going to make a function called public weapon item. I'm going to call this get weapon item by item ID, or just by ID. Now let's say int weapon ID, or string if you want to use string in your case. And then I'm going to say return. We're going to say weapon items dot first or default. And then we're going to say weapon equals greater than weapon dot item ID equals weapon ID. What does this mean? Basically, it's going to search the entire list for the first thing that matches this weapon ID if it exists for the first weapon. So then it will return the first weapon that matches this ID. If there is no weapon that matches this ID, it will return null. So this is pretty straightforward. It's just going to search the list and find the first result with that same ID, if any at all. And if not, it returns null. Okay, so next let's go over to the scene and create an empty game object. And we're going to say world item database. And then let's add a script to that. And I'm going to drag that up to the top after. I'm going to make that a prefab, and I'm going to take a sip of tea. Okay, so let's add our script here. And then let's go to the weapon items. And I'm just going to add my shield and sword right away. And it's important, like I said, you give them a unique ID. Otherwise, it will just grab the first one it finds. So I'm going to go to my shield here. And I'm just going to use, let's just say 0001. And then for my sword, I'll use 0002. And I'm just giving an example. Feel free to use whatever you want. Obviously, this is just for demonstration purposes. You should give some thought to how you want to structure your IDs so they're easier to find. And I'll elaborate more on that in a second. Okay, so let's go now and make a prefab of this. And there we go. We have our weapons in there, our sword and shield at least. So now we can use two of these when we save or load. So let's go to the player manager now. Let's figure out how we're going to save these. So let's open the player manager, and then let's also open the, what do I call it? Character save data script. So let's open that up as well. And we're going to make some new fields on the character save data script, new variables rather. So we need to know the item ID for our current left-hand and current right-hand weapon. So I'm going to say header, equipment. I'm just going to make this strictly for equipment. And again, I'm going to show you guys a few primary examples, and you can carry this logic onto everything in the game, like spells and like items and quick slots. But if you know how to do one, you know how to do it all. So I'll give you 5, 6, 7 examples. I'll show you how to do the right hand, left hand, and all of your armor equipment. So let's start off by saying public int current right hand weapon ID, and then public int current left hand weapon ID. And we can grab those pretty easily. We know that in our character's inventory, we have the current left and current right hand weapon, and there's always a weapon there. It's never null. If it's null, it defaults to the unarmed weapon, and even that can have an ID. So we're going to say current character save data dot current right hand weapon ID is equal to player inventory manager dot current right weapon, that's what I called it, dot item ID. And likewise, the current character save data dot current left hand weapon ID is equal to player inventory manager dot left weapon dot item ID. Now, since the unarmed weapon is technically a weapon, and it is our default weapon if nothing's there, we need to add that to the item database too, which I will do momentarily. Do not forget that, otherwise you will never be able to equip the unarmed weapon, and that will break your game most likely. So next, down here on load character save data, it's pretty simple. We say player inventory manager dot right weapon is equal to world item database dot instance get weapon item by ID, and we pass our character save data dot current right weapon ID. And it's just that easy. So in the case of it being null, it will return nothing, and then obviously you will have a problem. But it should never be null in this case, because if your character has nothing in their left or right hand, it should, because of our code, default to the unarmed weapon. So this should never give you an issue. But if you want to, what you could do is make a check in the statement where we're getting a weapon, and you could say if it is null, then just place the unarmed weapon in its place. That's if you want to be extra cautious. So I'm going to do the same thing here now with the left weapon. We can say player inventory manager dot left weapon is equal to the current left hand weapon ID. And I'm going to take a sip of tea. Okay, next we're going to say player inventory manager. And then we're going to call the loading. Oh, it's not the player inventory manager. It's the equipment manager. I'm getting my projects mixed up. I have so many. No, I think it's actually, we called it something different in this project. It's the weapon manager. So player weapon slot manager dot load both weapons on slots. Okay, so let's save that now. We should test that just to make sure before we move on. So I'm going to go to the world item database, and I'm going to drag an unarmed to, as I said before, and I gave the unarmed ID 0000. Now if I go into the game and I save it, you can see I have nothing in my left hand. If I load it, nothing on my left hand, straight sword on my right hand, we're good. Now I equip my shield, I load it again, it should go back to nothing. So if I load it, yes, nothing on my left hand, and a straight sword on my right hand. So that is working as intended. Perfect. Now, it is a little bit different for armor, and I will show you why. Unlike your current left hand and right hand weapon, your armor can be null. You can have nothing in its slot. So we need to make a bit of logic to determine what we do if nothing is in the slot. And I'll show you what I do personally. So what you want to do is make an integer value again for all the head, chest, leg, and hand equipment, just like your weapons. Now, if it's null, you still need to assign an integer value to your saved character data. But what you want to do is have a value you reserve for non-existent. So with a string, you could just type null if you want. And with an integer, what I always do is use -1. This is just my preference. I'll show you what I mean, just so it's more clear, because I know me explaining it without typing it isn't doing it justice. So first, let's just make a list. Public list equipment item, and this is on the world item database. Do the same thing you did for weapon items. You can copy the exact same functionality, but replace weapon item with equipment item. And furthermore, equipment is not always the same. It's a head equipment, body equipment, hand equipment, but we can just use the base class equipment item, and I'll show you because we can do a thing called a cast. I'm sure a lot of you know what that is, but it is very simple. So just copy and paste the weapon item stuff for now and change weapon to equipment. I'm going to take a sip of tea again. Okay, tea's gone. So change weapon to equipment. So we're going to say equipment equals greater than equipment.item ID, and we're going to say it will be equipment ID. So find the first piece of equipment in the list of equipment items with this item ID and return it. If not, null. So let's save that now. Okay, let's head back over now into our project and open up the Knight's Armor, and let's assign it some IDs. So as I said before, you just don't want to give it random numbers. Here's what I do in my project. I give a number for the type. So for example, weapons start with 0, and armor starts with 1. Consumable starts with 2, etc., etc. And then I give 3 or 4 digits at the end for the placement. So, for example, armor 1001 would be the first piece, 1002 would be the second piece, 1003 would be the third piece, and so on and so on. So 1 representing the type, which is armor, and then after that, the number of the item itself. This is just how I do it, but it's nice to give every item type its own starting signature so you know what it is immediately and don't get mixed up. So after we've done that, let's go ahead and add some logic here now to the player manager. First, on the save character data to current save slot, what we want to say is current character save data dot current headgear item ID is equal to player inventory dot current helmet equipment dot item ID. And then the same thing for our chest equipment. So we would say, I can't remember if we call it current chest gear item ID is equal to player inventory manager dot current body equipment dot item ID. You can tell it's been a while since I've changed these values, or wrote with these values, because now I call them something completely different. I guess I went back and forth between chest and body, and not that it matters, but it's just a slight difference. You can rename those if you want. And then do the same thing with your leg and your hand gear. So current hand gear item ID is equal to player inventory manager dot current leg. Nope, not leg equipment. Whoops, messed that up. Oh, I messed something else up here too. I've got current head gear item ID. That should be hand, and I've got current hand up here. I'm all over the place. Okay, there we go. It's easy to mistake that, so make sure you don't do the same thing I did. Dot current hand equipment dot item ID. Although I feel like if I mess up, somebody in the comments will be nice enough to tell me, so I'm sure they'll pick it out. They usually do. All right, so now down here in the load character data from current character sleeve slot. I'm sorry if you heard that. I forgot to mute my Discord. We're going to say equipment item, head equipment item equals world item database. Then dot instance, like before. And then you want to use the new function that we have, get equipment item by ID. Now, here's where you're going to run into a problem. When you try to assign this, it's going to tell you that you can not do it because the head slot requires a piece of helmet equipment and not an equipment item. That is where we're going to use a cast. And I'm sure many of you know what a cast is. If you're at this point in the tutorial series, you probably have experience with them. So we're going to say if head equipment does not equal null, we're going to say player inventory manager dot current head equipment is equal to head equipment as being a cast, because this is the base class equipment item. We can cast the equipment item as something that derives from it, as a head equipment. And then basically, if this is a valid piece of head equipment, it will not be null here, or it will able to be slotted here into the current helmet equipment. So pretty straightforward. So if this item exists in the database, we apply it to the character's equipment. Now, back up here, we do have a problem though, because as I said before, there is a chance that you're not wearing any equipment and this can be null. So what we're going to do is make a check for each of these. And we're going to say if player inventory manager.current helmet equipment does not equal null, then we do this. And if it is null, I'm just going to assign a value that I know represents null. So in my case, I will say -1, because in my projects, I will never use a negative integer value for an item ID. So now that it's -1, I know that that is the case where nothing is there. And because it is -1, when we try to get it from the item database, nothing will return, and therefore it returns null, and nothing is ever assigned to the equipment slot. And it's just as easy as that. So do the same thing with the body, the legs, and the hands. And I will make sure this works after this, and we'll test it. And this same logic applies for everything. So if you wanted to do something with, for example, current spell you have equipped, or a current quick slot or consumable item, then you check for it. And if it's not null, you assign it, or else you assign it the null value. And you can do this same logic for every other thing you want to save on your character's equipment. So basically what I'm trying to say is you can apply all of this everywhere else, and it works the exact same way. So I won't repeat myself over and over again because, again, as I say before in the series, I'm trying to showcase the functionality here, not actually walk through every piece of the entire project with you, because if I did that, we'd be here for a very, 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 very long time. So you can apply this to any other place you want to save things, spells, consumables, etc., etc. And if you are confused about any part of that, just let me know in the comments, or better, actually Discord, and I or somebody else will get back to you. So after that's done, let's go in here, and I'm just going to finish this up. So I'm just going to come back to this real quick. I'll do one more actually on screen here. So if I just come over and say equipment item again, and we can say body equipment is equal to world item database dot instance dot get equipment by ID. We pass it, and again we check if it's not null, and if it's not, we say player inventory manager dot current body equipment equals body equipment as a body equipment item. So we make sure we do the cast. Oops. That's not what we do. I'm supposed to assign the variable, not retype that again. So equals body equipment as body equipment. Okay, cool. So I'm going to snap the rest here real quick. There we go. That is the hands and legs. It works the exact same way as you can see. It just, you cast it as a different type, obviously. And then lastly, we say player equipment manager dot. Now, what did I call that? It is called equip all equipment models. And we save. So now let's go in the game and test it. So as you can see here, if I take off my chest plate and I start the game, my player should be not wearing a chest plate. Okay, cool. So let's basically go into the game now and save this. And then load it. Yes, and that works as intended. Okay, now let's equip the chest plate in here. And this isn't going to change it in game because it's not running the logic for equipping it. And then let's save it again. So now we have it saved to our torso equipment slot. So let's save and load, and it doesn't work. So why is that? Well, we forgot to add all of our knight's equipment into the world item database. And because it's not there, it can't be loaded because it doesn't exist in the database. So let's add everything here. And let's make sure it is in place and works. So again, the same thing with your weapons. If you want to save armor, you need to make sure it is in the database or else it will not load. Okay, so now that we have it all here, let's try that again. Let's go to our player. You can see we have no body equipment equipped. So let's start the game. Let's go to the save game. You can see we can look at the data here. So if you go to the World Save Manager, you can see there's no data here. So let's just save the game. You can see the chest equipment is -1. Okay. So now let's go to our player's prefab again. And while the game is running, let's equip the torso, which again won't change it yet, but now it's in that slot. And now let's save the game. You can see the ID changes for the chest gear. Now if we load the game, which will run the command for reloading our gear, you can see, there we go. So now you have the ability to save your equipment. All right, guys. So in the next video, we're going to go over how to save whether you picked up items or special actions in-game that only can be done once. So for example, looting an item, once you loot it, it doesn't respawn. And for that, we're going to learn how to serialize dictionaries. And this can also apply to things like, if you've killed a boss, don't respawn it. If you've already woken up a boss, don't respawn it. So we're going to get into all of that in the next video. If you made it this far, please drop a like, leave a comment. It does genuinely help the series so much. And a special thank you, as always, to my patrons. I appreciate your existence so much. I will see you guys in the next video, where we will advance more on our save system.